In this video, I'll right some old wrongs and tell you how to get some games that aren't Warhammer out on the table and, with like an opponent. As I said, I'm going to right some wrongs in this video. Recently, I was watching YouTube, as I do, and I came across an old video about a wargaming subject very near and dear to my heart. However, the information was, as I said, old, like 10 years old, in fact, and though it was presented by a young, handsome, scrappy internet personality in his basement, I still felt that it was something that I needed to correct and probably signal boost for you all here in 2023 and beyond. Yeah, jokes aside, right? Like that old video is an ancient one of mine from way back in the early days of this channel, May of 2013, just 2 months into Tabletop Minions. And it was called Become a Game Advocate, which isn't a very dynamic title, frankly. If you'd like to watch it, you can do so here. Pachow. But I mentioned it in a recent video and thought that maybe I should update that old video for today, for 2023. Some things are surprisingly different now, while others are still kind of the same. So here we are. The video wasn't about being a gaming advocate. Instead, it was more about being an advocate for a specific wargame. Generally, a game that you'd like to see more people playing. Let's get this out of the way right off the bat. Within wargaming, Warhammer doesn't really need any advocates. It is the most popular titles, I guess, because out there. It's because there's Warhammer 40,000, the sci-fi thing, and then there's Warhammer Age of Sigmar, which is the fantasy thing. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about Warhammer, right? Now, that said, maybe a smaller game within Games Workshop, like Necromunda or Warcry, that could use some advocacy, but generally we're talking about games outside of Games Workshop. So what do I mean when I talk about being an advocate for a game? Well, a big complaint amongst wargamers is that it's hard to find people who will play any other game besides the 800-pound gorillas in the industry, 40K and Age of Sigmar, right? The downside to our hobby, to some degree, is that you need to find other people who probably live at least sort of near you to play with, because these games are played in person, across tabletop. You can play video games against people from all over the world, but tabletop war games are played across the tabletop. You might not like to hear it, but getting wargamers to play something other than Warhammer takes a bit of work. Right up front, right? Some people will never play anything else. They're too ingrained, usually in the lore, I guess, and just nothing else will suffice, no matter how screwed up the rules might seem to them right now, or how expensive the models and the books and all that stuff are getting. They just won't play anything else. I don't get it either, right? It's just best to not try and convert those folks and maybe focus on players who seem at least slightly interested in trying new things. So how do you get people to try a new or different wargame title? Well, you'll have to take the initiative and do some work. Generally, it's easiest to become an advocate for skirmish games, I find, because you'll need to build and paint two forces so that you can teach the game to players who agree to try. And, when it's just small skirmish forces, it's easier to do that than two big giant army forces. You can't, convince someone to try out a new title if they have to build and then build and then paint their own force just to try it out with you, right? That's not going to work. If the game is very model agnostic, right? Well, then you can use whatever models you like, and if they have a lot of models, then that they might be able to bring their own models if they're interested. Just be like, hey, you need like a wizard and 10 skeletons, so that might work. But it's generally easier if you supply the models yourself. Now, the big thing is, again, here in 2023, when I last did this video, there was almost no 3D printing going on at all. And now, if you have access to 3D printing, whether you are a 3D printing person or whether you have a friend who will do it, it's much easier for you to crank out all kinds of models, to build all kinds of forces, maybe skirmish, maybe even bigger if you don't mind painting armies, to be able to give your potential players who are going to try to get into the game a choice so that they can pick what they want to do. There's just a lot more options in models now than there was 10 years ago. Also, to become an advocate for a game, you need to be able to teach the game. If you're trying to teach a new game to someone who's been playing tabletop wargames for many years, this might not be as difficult. But if this person is relatively new to wargaming, not just the game you're trying to teach, but wargaming in general, it can be a lot harder. If you don't think that you're good at teaching, you're maybe not sure necessarily, then maybe try first on a friend or a loved one, something like that. Even if they don't, wargame currently, you'll be more comfortable with them, in theory, and they can give you constructive feedback to help you to teach other players. To help with that issue, and also something that's been relatively new within the last 10 years, solo wargames. There's more solo play wargames out there now than there's ever been before. Some are like solo play only, but most have the ability to be solo play and also co-op, with another player, and also, if you're interested, like versus or PvP type mode against another player. The interesting benefit to games like this is that it allows you to learn and play the game by yourself whenever you want, but also you get to prepare and learn the game even more for when you start teaching it to others. Basically, if you tell the person that you're trying to teach that you're willing to explain the game to them and help them throughout the entirety of that kind of experience, and you already have models for them to use, let them pick which force they'd like to play. That really kind of helps. They get some agency in that. And that there's no strings attached, then most people will agree and, try to learn something new. If they refuse, don't push it. Go on to someone else. It's a real uphill battle trying to get someone to overcome kind of long-held notions in wargaming, so you're better off trying to convert the willing. I just used the term convert there, and it's maybe not the right word, actually. It's important to let people know that getting involved in your game, this one that you're trying to be an advocate for, doesn't preclude them from still playing the other wargame or wargames that they enjoy. Believe it or don't, but people can play more than one tabletop wargame if they want, especially if they're model agnostic games, because then the models can do like double or triple duty or even more, between multiple games. So a pretty important question, how do you find players, actual people, to advocate to? Well, that's also changed a good deal. In my original video from 2013, I was pushing the idea of teaching people at your local game store, and I said that most stores have a Facebook page or group or whatever, and that you could check there and see if people want to try out the game that you're teaching. I still think that stores are a pretty good place to teach, as they're generally public and safe and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know that I'd suggest Facebook anymore. Most stores have a Discord server these days, so check with your local store and see how to join theirs. If they don't have a Discord server, maybe they have something else online that they use for the players who hang out at their store so that they can kind of communicate and set up games and stuff like that. That's a good place to start. I mean, heck, you can even go old school and maybe hang like a flyer or something at the local store and meet up with, people in the store that way. Generally, the store employees should have some suggestions on how to do this, or, at their local place. They're generally a good resource to use. Speaking of Discord, the game that you're trying to advocate for probably has a Discord server too. The company at the very least, whether it's a big company or even a little tiny company, because Discord servers are free. See if you can join that. It's a bit unlikely unless you live in like a really highly populated area, but you might just be able to find people who play the game that you like and are trying to advocate for, and they might kind of live near you, although as the game gets a little bit more kind of indie, then the chance that they do lessens, I will admit. But then if you do find somebody that way, you won't even have to teach or convince anybody. You just play because they're obviously there because they like the game as well. That said, then the two of you, of course, should then become advocates for the game in your area. Two heads are better than one. This last suggestion seems obvious, but it still bears mentioning. If you have a gaming group that you currently play with, start there. Again, don't burn bridges. If a person in your group that you normally play with isn't interested, then don't bring it up again. However, when they go on a tirade soon, and they will, about, how much they're angry with Games Workshop for whatever it is they've done now, you are allowed to give them a bit of a knowing look. That's the knowing look, right? And then they'll eventually ask what the knowing look is for, and then you can say that your offer still stands to teach them this other game that you're advocating for. Eventually, you might catch that fish. It'd be great if we could always find someone to play a war game with whenever we want, even if the game that we wanted to play wasn't the most popular game out there. However, that's just not how tabletop, war games work. This is one of the many, many reasons why the video game industry makes 100 times more money than what the tabletop gaming industry makes in any given year. Ease of use, right? But if you want to have those great wargaming moments, like in-person wargaming moments, then you're going to have to be the change that you want to see in the world. Most importantly, understand that it won't work every time, but it can work, only if you try. Do you have experience being an advocate for a game in your area? Any tips and tricks you used to grow a local community? And what game was it that you grew that local community? Sometimes that can change how you approach advocacy. Let me know all that and more down in the comments down there below. If you liked this video and you want to see more advocates out there, hit the like button to see tiny fireworks/confetti. I'm still not really sure which. And to get this video out to more people. Subscribe if you're interested in seeing more videos like this. And thanks for watching.